Welcome back to our attendees. We now have our next speaker, Ms. Sheila Warren, Deputy Head of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Head of Data Policy, Blockchain and Digital Assets at the World Economic Forum. Over to you, Sheila.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you all today about what we call the Presidio principles. And the previous speaker, Ahmed, was an excellent introduction to this topic because now you have a good sense of what a blockchain is. And he also discussed briefly the decentralization and the principles that underlie the use of a blockchain. Just as a very quick recap for those who might be joining right now, one of the major changes or advancements of a blockchain over other kinds of technology is that it has the potential to remove or disintermediate centralized actors. So you go from a system where you have one actor who serves as possibly a gatekeeper, allowing access to a system, or one place where all data is stored, creating what we call a honeypot, a very hackable, very attractive place to go steal that data. You shift that and you create a system that is more peer-to-peer, where there isn't a centralized authority, perhaps, or if there is, their authority is limited in many ways. Now, at the forum, we became very interested. I joined the forum in 2017 to start the blockchain, the distributed ledger team here. So I focus on blockchain, crypto, digital assets, and data policy and related topics. I'm also, as the introducer so kindly noted, the deputy head of our entire Center for the 4IR, which is a network of 13 different affiliate centers around the world that are thinking about the ways technologies are intersecting to move us into this next industrial revolution, as we call it, this next way of thinking about humans and computers and how we interact with each other in the world. Now, many of those technologies do intersect with each other, and a blockchain is involved in some capacity. So whether it's data secured on a blockchain or via a blockchain that is then being used to train a machine learning algorithm, whether it's smart devices that are sending that data to some sort of system that's got a distributed ledger behind it, these things are kind of happening in varying degrees in various industries. So the forum thought it was very important on the blockchain team to really ground this different work and these applications in the foundations of decentralization, and to have a way of indicating how decentralized a particular application or project might be. So we got together with our global blockchain council. This is a group that subsequently has shifted into a different focus area. But as you can see, in typical World Economic Forum fashion, it was a multi-stakeholder group. We had 29 different blockchain leaders that came together from all different sectors around the world. Here are some of the organizations that participated in this. You can see there were governments, there were funders, there were other international organizations like us, some civil society organizations, and some academics. So it was a group that was very opinionated in their views on what a blockchain was or wasn't. There were skeptics of the entire technology within this. And we brought them together and said, how can we as a global council move the topic of blockchain forward in a productive manner? And you can imagine we met for 2 days in the Presidio, in the offices of the forum, in what's called the Presidio in San Francisco, hence the ultimate name, Presidio Principles. And what we decided as a group, after a lot of heated discussion, was that there was a need to think about some set of principles that grounded the work. We could all agree that a blockchain would add value if it did adhere to the principles we wound up establishing. And I'll walk through them quickly. We divided the principles into 4 areas. The first 2 are listed here: transparency and accessibility, and then agency and interoperability. And I'll pause for a moment here to say, it was very important to us to recognize that a blockchain, as you heard the previous speaker note, can make things more transparent in that the transaction moment when information passes from one party to another party is recorded in a way that, based on how you design the blockchain system, can actually be visible to a broad variety of stakeholders. However, just because you can see something doesn't necessarily mean that you understand what you're looking at. And so one thing that we work very hard to do is to indicate that transparency doesn't mean the information is accessible. And it also doesn't mean there's accountability, which I'll get to in a second, built into the system either. So what we thought was really important was participants in a system, those who are token holders in a system, those who are users of a system that has a blockchain underlying it, what should they be able to understand, to have access to? What information should be made transparent and available to them? And a number of those are here. This is all available on our website. If you were to just put Presidio Principles World Economic Forum into any browser, you would immediately get to our website that describes all of these different principles. So rights and obligations, risks and benefits, performance expectations, SLAs, and how the services operated were all things that we thought were critically important. Now, related but distinct is the concept of agency and interoperability. And here we talk about the right for participants to actually own and manage their data. It's one of the critical advantages of a blockchain over other systems. Again, it's not to say other systems cannot allow this, but the design has to be deliberately put into place, and that often isn't the case. So we talked about cryptographic keys. You ought to be able to have an ability to take and independently store your access to the system via your keys. What kinds of data are you going to allow to be shared with third parties, and what does the consent look like around that transfer? What indication should you have it's happening, and what ability should you have to decline to consent to such a transfer of data? You should be able to take your data and go with it. A big complaint about centralized platforms was the inability to take your data and move it other places. That has since been resolved in some platforms. You can now remove your data from some centralized platforms and take it to somewhere else and set up a new profile, for example, but it isn't easy. And it doesn't mean that your data does not still remain within the company, the first company that had your data. And then, of course, you should be able to change your mind. So if you decide that going forward, you don't want to be part of that system anymore, you should be able to pull that consent. So all of these things we thought were critical. And the focus here, of course, is empowerment of users. And here's where I want to pause for a moment. So one of the things we're very interested in observing with blockchains in emerging economies, or as we call them, frontier high growth economies, is the ability of users to be empowered in systems. So rather than just having a set of conditions that you have to take, and you have no ability to really influence that system at all, what a blockchain can do via blockchain governance, which again, the previous speaker mentioned briefly, is you kind of have a vote in some cases in the operation of the system. In the decentralized finance space, a lot of protocols there run on the concept of holding a governance token. So I have a governance token in a particular DeFi protocol. Before a code change happens, I can vote with my token about whether I think it's a good idea or not. Before funds are moved out of the treasury held by that particular protocol, I can vote about whether I think those funds are going to good purposes or not. There's some ability to basically engage with the system in ways you can't really with other systems. The forum calls this concept stakeholder capitalism, and there's a big body of work here that we've been doing for many, many years, long before I got to the forum on this topic. And the idea is rather than just extractive shareholder capitalism, you can actually ensure that there is a more equitable allocation of risk and reward across the variety of stakeholders, across the entire stakeholder set, which could include customers, employees, and others, in addition to just shareholders and company managers. Okay, the other two principles are privacy and security, which hopefully is pretty obvious why that's important, and then accountability and governance, like I mentioned. So I'll start on the right with accountability and governance. Here, the idea is, like I mentioned, just because information is transparent doesn't mean that there's any accountability around it. And here I'll talk about something we call a data dump, right? So the idea that I might say, hey, I want information on some minor little thing about the system, and you don't want to give that to me, but you also can't say no. So what you do is you bury that. You just send me a mountain of information, and I can never really figure out what is that information I really need and what is signal and what is noise. So here what we say is accountability doesn't flow from transparency unless there is a system, a policy system, a governance system that makes sure that there is accountability built in. So here we say it's important for participants to understand what is that governance, what is the recourse if something goes wrong, what if bad data gets into a system? What is the recourse and rectification process for fixing that? And then also confirmation that everything that's being done is being done in accordance with recognized best practices around data protection. That's a pretty basic one. Almost everything complies with number 15 here, but it's important to capture this. Now, I'll end this part with privacy and security. So here the idea is that this is a more technical thing, but those who do have the technical capability should be able to understand through disclosure, is their data at risk? Can I see source code? Can I see these various things to understand what's actually happening in the system? Again, that presumes a pretty significant amount of technical knowledge on the part of a participant, but some do have that. And those that do or are willing to pay someone to come in and do an audit should have access to that. And then lastly, minimization of data collection, which is again a best practice. Data is not going in that's not necessary, and data is only being used for the purposes for which it was intended and provided, and there's no expansion or scope creep around that data. Okay, the principles are really designed to be action-oriented. So we have a whole list of signatory resources. We've had over 100 companies around the world sign this. We've had many, many more individuals sign this. And when you do sign it, what we ask is that you send this around to teams. They're designed to make sure that anybody, an individual or a company or an entity or group or a collection or an association, whatever it is, can have impact with these. We recommend that they're used, if you're a product person, we have a whole list of, if you're a product person, if you're a marketing person, if you're a media person, if you're a government, like how to use the principles. And a lot of it is providing a gating function. So if you are a coder, essentially, before you ship your product, you should go through at various points in time and make sure that you're adhering with the principles that are most relevant to your project. And thus you can achieve the signatory status of saying, we have considered these, we have taken them into account, and we have baked them into our project. These are not legally binding principles, to be very clear. They're statements of intention, they're aspirational. Very few projects, if any, could actually meet every single one of the principles. But the idea here is that this is the North Star. Projects that can meet more of these are going to be more decentralized or more rooted in the concept of empowerment and agency than other projects, right? And so there is an ability to make some comparisons there. It's not to say that those that don't, do this are necessarily doing something bad. They're doing something different. And that thing may not be leveraging the entire point of having a blockchain, in our view anyway, underlying the practice. Here are a list of some of the companies and others that have signed on to this. You can see, again, it's a really big mix. This is a small snapshot of those that have, because they don't fit on a slide, but they're on the website as well. And of course, we've seen that there are different organizations that do see it the way we see it. They're about good governance, they're about creation of accountability, and they're really about creating an ecosystem where as protocols begin to interoperate, there's an easier way to assess that they're all aligned in the same direction, they're all meeting the same standards, and they're all oriented towards, again, excuse me, this concept of user empowerment and agency. We welcome people to sign on to these as an organization and individual. We have a QRR on the site. There are guidance documents out there. So for those who deploy Ethereum, the Ethereum Foundation actually issued a guidance document that says, here's what EF advises you do if you are working in the Ethereum ecosystem with this. There are case studies around this that are all available. And we found that there is tremendous excitement about this. It's been translated now into almost a dozen languages. It's being used all around the world. And again, it kind of serves as this check. As you get into building projects or as you get into new policy work, it's sometimes easy to scope creep and forget what the point was of that project in the first place, and whether or not it even requires a blockchain underlying it. And the Obsidian principles are a nice way to check and make sure that you remain aligned with your original intentions and your vision, and that we're together building a healthy, vibrant ecosystem. So with that, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheila, for your time and presentation. So some questions for you. So World Economic Forum works globally. So anything specifically you're doing in Africa or Sudan in any of your projects right now?
Yeah, great question. So we do have what's called an affiliate center. I mentioned that we have a dozen of these around the world. There's one in Rwanda and there's one in South Africa. And those are the base camps, if you will, of our work in Africa. We're not currently doing anything in Sudan, though I would love to. So I would welcome outreach from people who are running projects there. We currently are focusing our work on digital currency, stablecoins, crypto, and CBDCs. We also have a project we call the Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator. That is a project that we will be driving into, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, but other parts as well. That work will kick off sometime in the new year in 2022. So we're doing an assessment right now of where we might dive in. Right now, it's looking like Ethiopia is a possibility. possibly Senegal, but we're not entirely sure yet. So Sudan is definitely on the table as a place that we would do case studies and focus some of our work on sustainability and impact.
Okay, so we hope there will be some progress by the time the next edition takes place, and we'll see you in
Yes,
Sudan.
I would think so.
In Sudan then.
Yes, one sure hopes.
Yeah, okay, so done. Ms. Sheila, thank you very much for your time. And if there are any questions, please send it to us and I'll get them answered by Ms. Sheila. You have a nice evening ahead, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much. Much appreciated. Goodbye.